Tim Legler from the worldwide leader in sports and also Sirius Radio joining me here on the Rich Eisen Show. How you been, Tim?
Rich, how are you, buddy? Good to be on with you, man.
What do you think the Clippers should do here? What happens to the Clippers from here on out, Tim?
Well, I think what people want to see happen and what's actually going to happen are two entirely different things. I think Chris Paul stays. I think Doc Rivers stays. I think Blake Griffin has a reasonable chance to stay. He's in a tough situation because he's at the point he's going to make $21 million next year. It's a player option, and so he can opt out and become a free agent if he wants to do that. He has been so unbelievable at the end of the year, the last two seasons, that I really look at Blake Griffin and say willing to pay him a max contract outside of L.A. And I don't know that that's the case. Even though he's 28 years old and he's one of the most athletically gifted power forwards that this league has ever seen, he's missed, I think, 60-plus games in the regular season the last 2 years. He's missed the last two postseasons. He missed the first year of his career. And I just don't think that there's a reliability factor there with Blake Griffin that makes him super attractive to other teams and paying him max contracts. So he may very well be back. I think the biggest changes are going to come with the supporting cast because there was a moment in that game yesterday in a Game 7 when you looked out there and it was just this sort of quilted blanket full of veterans out on the floor. And you're playing guys like Paul Pierce in the last year of his career, 22 minutes in a game down in Portland, Raymond Felton, Maurice Spates. They need to get younger and better with their rotational players, but I don't know you're going to see a lot of change at the top, Rich.
Well, I mean, because it just seems that it should work with Doc at the helm and the big three that, is better than most big threes, one would think on paper. Why is it not work? And J.J. Redick, who I think is terrific, why is it not working, Tim?
For me, the biggest reason, if I could point to any one thing, is they do not have an identity offensively when things tighten up. And here's what I mean by that. If you look at every other team in the league that's actually a contender, legitimate contender, you know where the offense is going to flow through at important moments in the fourth quarter. Every team in this league that really matters, you can say that about. You can't really say that about the Clippers because Chris Paul doesn't want to play the way that he had to play at the end of the series. He doesn't want to be a guy taking 20-plus shots a night. That's not who Chris Paul is. Chris Paul is a guy that just wants to lead, and he wants to facilitate and also score because he's capable, when he needs to. But to tell Chris Paul you're going to have to get 30 to give us a chance to win, that's not who Chris Paul is. Blake Griffin has holes in his game offensively that prevent them from giving the ball to him and just letting him go at critical times in the game or letting him be the guy that you initiate everything through. He's still not a trustworthy free throw shooter. He is, limited with his perimeter game, even though he's become a better mid-range jump shooter. He's a guy that basically has to overwhelm you physically in the post, and that's going to be very difficult to do in playoff basketball. DeAndre Jordan clearly is not that kind of player. J.J. Redick, you saw, just got basically taken out of this series because he had bigger defenders on him that were determined to not let him get free and with all the motion and running around that he does. So I think that's been their biggest issue. They don't have an identity of where they're going to go in important moments in the playoffs, and it's why now for 6 consecutive years they've won more than 60% of their games in the regular season, but they flame out in the playoffs year after year. Now, injuries have definitely played a part. You can't ignore it. But I also look at Utah and say, well, Rudy Gobert basically played 3 games in this series. He missed 3 with an injury. He played 13 minutes on Sunday because of foul trouble and took 1 shot. So they were without a guy that's actually going to be probably second team all league at the center position, and they didn't have him hardly at all in this series. So they were also hampered, but the Clippers just had no answer offensively, and that's been the case for that team year in, year out in the playoffs. When it really gets tight, they just don't know where they're going to go to get surefire either scoring or double teams initiated so they can generate better shots. And that, to me, has been their biggest problem.
ESPN's Tim Legler and co-host of Above the Rim on Sirius XM NBA Radio, weekdays between 10 and 1 Eastern, right here on the Rich Eisen Show. Break down Houston, San Antonio. Who wins it, Tim?
Well, I definitely like the Spurs. I agree. It could be a long series. Wouldn't shock me if that goes 6 or 7 games. I think one of the things you have to look at, San Antonio defends a three-point line better than any team in the NBA, and they've defended the Rockets incredibly well from behind the arc, 29% on the year in their 4 matchups. So San Antonio defensively, because their commitment, their communication, they just are so well prepared. It's not necessarily personnel across the board. It's more just their commitment to the game plan and executing it. And I think Houston, because of that, at the end of the day, they might have enough cold stretches in this series as San Antonio is able to take control of games. So I do like the Spurs to win it. I'm fascinated with the matchup. I want to see mainly how San Antonio defends James Harden with those high ball screens, because that is the series. It was the series against Oklahoma City. I didn't think Oklahoma City had a very good game plan with how they were going to guard James Harden, because I think they picked him up far too far out on the floor. You don't need to pick him up 35, 38, 40 feet from the basket the way that Robertson was. And then getting beat there, whether off the dribble or off of a ball screen, and now you got James Harden coming at you with a head of steam with a big guy basically backpedaling. And you're at their mercy then. Either he's going to get to the line, shoot a layup, get fouled, or he's going to kick out when the help comes for an open three. So I see San Antonio be a little bit smarter in how they guard James Harden. And at the end of the day, I think I have more trust in San Antonio in the big moments than I will in Houston. But it's going to be a really entertaining series. Fascinating to see San Antonio try to slow this team down. I don't think Houston played particularly well offensively in the Oklahoma City series, and they still won that in 5 games. So they're an offensive powerhouse. There's no doubt about it, but I think San Antonio has defended them as well as anybody.
And then the rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals and an Eastern Conference semifinal tonight. Last year, we saw it was whichever team was at home won by 20 or more, essentially. Do we see a repeat of this, or do the Cavs make shorter work of the Raptors when it's all said and done?
Yeah, I think this is going to be a better series than we saw a year ago, because truthfully, last year Cleveland gave the Raptors 2 games when they went up to Toronto. They just fell in love with the three-point shot. They actually were running to the line in transition when they had numbers. They were fanning out, shooting threes, fell in love with that shot, let Raptors get a couple of wins, and then went home and quickly restored order. Really, there was a lot of basketball in that series that was not competitive. This is a much better Raptors team, I think, because they've been through it. They believe in themselves, and then they made some great additions with Ibaka, P.J. Tucker. They've lengthened their rotation. They've added guys that can guard LeBron a little bit better, at least, where you need to limit the amount of help you give. And also Norman Powell, if he looks anything like he did in this last series, this is the best Toronto Raptors team maybe that we've ever seen. And I think that they believe that they're much more prepared to face a Cleveland team that they don't think is as good as last year, because defensively we know about the issues they've had. They're a little bit streakier, this team. So it comes down for me, how much can you guard LeBron James and Kyrie Irving, but particularly LeBron, without committing extra help and playing one-on-one as much as possible to try to take away the three-point shooting of their role players. And if Toronto can succeed in that, because they've got a number of guys that they can run at him, if they can get away with it for stretches in games where they don't have to double to give up, Channing Frye, Richard Jefferson, and Kevin Love and Kyle Korver, all these open shots these guys get, then Toronto has a real chance in this series. I mean, I'd obviously lay money on the Cavs if I had to, but I think this could be a long, hard-fought series.
Tim, appreciate the knowledge. We'll chat soon.
Look forward to it, Rich. Take care.
You got it. At Legs ESPN, Tim Legler.
The Rich Eisen Show, weekdays at noon Eastern on Audience.